Now on BBC One, the main news of the evening with Laurie Mayer.
Saddam Hussein goes to Kuwait with a New Year message. He tells his troops, prepare for a hot confrontation. And the cost of British troops in the Gulf is already £480 million. It could affect taxation and spending at home. Good evening. President Saddam Hussein says Iraq has amassed 60 divisions, more than 500,000 men, on the border with Saudi Arabia to prepare for any attack. He's been in Kuwait seeing in the new year with his troops. He cooked meals for his men, ate with them, and told them to prepare for war against the infidels led by America. Earlier today, the Iraqi government rejected an appeal from Egypt's President Mubarak to withdraw from Kuwait. The president warned Saddam Hussein of a merciless inferno and seas of blood if war starts. But the Iraqi news agency called Mr. Mubarak a clown and a liar and accused him of playing a sly role on behalf of President Bush.
The president spent his New Year's Eve visiting his army in Kuwait and examining the cooking arrangements for them. It's the kind of thing Iraqi television likes to portray the president as doing. But even though he spent a good deal of time watching the rice being boiled and even added the salt himself, he wasn't shown meeting ordinary soldiers, just their officers. An official statement said the president was there to celebrate the end of the old year and the start of what was called the hot confrontation to come. It's reported that 5 new divisions of the elite Republican Guard have now been formed, some of them to be deployed in Kuwait. As the president briefed his officers on the political situation, it turned into a fierce attack on King Fahd of Saudi Arabia, a villain and a traitor, as he called him. All Iraqis would fight until God decided who would win.
We don't want to see one drop of blood spilled. But whatever God wills, that is the way it's going to be.
But for most Iraqis, New Year's Eve was as carefree and enjoyable as always, a chance to let off steam. This year, perhaps, with the future so uncertain, there was a particular intensity to it. But no one was hostile to us. Then came the stroke of midnight, and the first seconds of a new year whose outcome no one here can know. Even now, no one could bring themselves to believe that war could be just a couple of weeks or so away. Saddam Hussein himself still seems to believe that the United States and its allies lack the will to fight. But Western diplomats here are starting to say that war may be unavoidable. John Simpson, BBC News, Baghdad.
Here, the Chancellor, Norman Lamont, has said that Britain's commitment in the Gulf has so far cost around £480 million. He warned that as the crisis went on, the cost could affect taxation and public spending.
The escalating cost of sending British troops to the Gulf has already led to an overrun in planned expenditure, and the unknown length of a possible conflict is putting pressure on Norman Lamont, Chancellor now for 5 weeks, who acknowledges he could find his budget calculations going adrift because of the Gulf crisis.
Clearly, a war could affect both tax revenues and it could also affect public expenditure. But precisely what the effect would be would depend very much on how long the war went on.
As to the economy as a whole, unemployment will increase, says the Chancellor, but he thinks companies should be able to cope with the downturn, and a lower rate of inflation would be to the advantage of everyone in the country.
We're at the beginning of a new year. There is a lot of gloom and doom, a lot of pessimistic talk. But actually, there is a silver lining there, and there is a prize this year. That is that we have an excellent chance of getting inflation down and getting it quite sharply down.
Neil Kinnock says the government has rammed the economy into recession, and Labour accused the Chancellor of complacency bordering on the irresponsible.
Who can have confidence in a government which, after 11 years, is promising success again at the end of another year? The fact is that Tory economic incompetence has failed Britain. That's why we're facing again a deep and damaging recession.
Jim Wallace for the Liberal Democrats said unexpected spending on British troops shouldn't be used by the Chancellor as a smokescreen for economic mismanagement. The cost to Britain so far is equivalent to a third of a penny off income tax. And with Gulf expenditure now increasing at a faster rate, the continuing uncertainty makes an early election even less likely.
A former army nurse says that he'll defy his compulsory call-up and go to prison rather than serve in the Gulf. Henry Parr from Galashiels in Scotland has received his call-up papers ordering him to report for duty on Saturday.
Henry Parr served in the Royal Army Medical Corps. He bought himself out 12 years ago, becoming a psychiatric nurse. He says that for the last 10 years he's received no reservist training and no money from the army. He says he would be prepared to work in a military hospital in the UK, but not in the Gulf.
It's not a British colony, and they just shouldn't be there at all. Apart from that, it looks very much as if the Gulf is going to turn into a nuclear war. And that is totally abhorrent, not just to me, but to many, many people in the country. They can take me to court, they can put me in jail, they can do as they please, but I will not be going to the Gulf.
When the initial call for volunteer reservists was made, around 700 responded, but the forces need about 400 more. Over the next week, dozens of less willing reservists will be going through the procedure of reporting for duty in the Gulf. Anyone who refuses to cooperate in the call-up will be committing an offence, punishable by a prison sentence. But a Ministry of Defence spokesman again stressed this evening that individual problems would be looked at sympathetically. The government is clearly still hoping that the reserves can be mobilised without the need for court action.
Cabinet documents released today reveal that 30 years ago the British government ordered a plan to recapture Kuwait in the event of an Iraqi invasion. The documents, kept secret under a 30-year rule, also disclosed that the government planned to evacuate British citizens from Iraq in the event of war.
The government documents, on show for the first time at the Public Record Office, revealed that the Macmillan cabinet took very seriously the threat of an Iraqi invasion. The Sheikh of Kuwait had British protection, but wanted to speed up moves to independence. Iraq's revolutionary leader, General Abdul Qasim, who'd overthrown the previous pro-British regime in Baghdad, was claiming Kuwaiti territory. In Iraq, there were 2,000 British and foreign nationals, but a secret plan for their evacuation, codenamed Operation Hatch, was drawn up by the Ministry of Defence. Back in Britain, the RAF was on 24-hour standby to fly nationals out of Iraq. British troops in the Gulf were already on alert, and the cabinet asked service chiefs to prepare to defend Kuwait. Within a year, thousands of British troops moved in, on that occasion deterring Iraq from mounting an invasion.
The Roman Catholic primate of all Ireland, Archbishop Cathal Daly, has called for an independent inquiry into the killing of an unarmed man by soldiers in South Armagh on Sunday. He said the shooting of Fergal Carraher was deeply disturbing, and many responsible people were completely unconvinced by the Army's accounts of the incident.
When Dr. Daly was installed as the head of the Catholic Church in Ireland last month, he attacked all terrorism, and he's long been an outspoken critic in particular of the IRA. Speaking at a Mass for World Peace Day today, he described the shooting by soldiers of Fergal Carraher on Sunday as deeply disturbing. He called for a fully independent inquiry into the incident, saying that many responsible people were completely unconvinced by the account so far given by the British Army. And he said incidents like this did grave damage to the credibility of the security forces. Mr. Carraher was shot dead and his brother seriously injured as they drove their car through a checkpoint in County Armagh. The Army said they'd failed to stop and had knocked down 2 soldiers. Dr. Daly said today that such checks were there only because of IRA activity, and he called on them to stop their campaign. Nonetheless, his remarks have annoyed unionist politicians.
It's very good to condemn the IRA, but at the same time, if you continue a propaganda campaign of creating doubts about our own British Army or about the RUC, you are actually playing the game of the IRA. And I expected our new Archbishop would not do that. Many unionists had looked forward to a new message coming from the Roman Catholic Archbishop, and we feel very disappointed today by his statement.
For Dr. Daly to have made his comments shows the depth of feeling in the Catholic community about such shootings, particularly in the area where the incident took place.
British scientists say they're close to developing a vaccine which could eventually eradicate cervical cancer. Doctors at the Beeson Institute for Cancer Research and the Veterinary School in Glasgow believe they could start testing the vaccine on humans within 2 years.
Regular screening for cervical cancer costs the country millions of pounds a year. Hundreds of workers meticulously examine many thousands of slides to find abnormal smears. Yet still, the disease results in some 2,000 deaths a year. It's thought it's triggered by a virus, the human papillomavirus. Probably most women carry the virus, though only a tiny fraction of them develop malignant cells. Now at last, a vaccine against cervical cancer is in sight. One candidate vaccine is being developed at the Veterinary School in Glasgow by Professor William Jarrett. He's already developed a vaccine against a similar virus which affects cattle and hopes to start tests with a human vaccine within 2 years.
But if the vaccine's successful, then in time it could eradicate cervical cancer. And that disease would then become a historical interest only. And if it is successful, then it might simply be the first of a whole series of cancers that are caused by viruses that could be eradicated in the same way, of which some are very common, liver cancer, for example.
If all goes well with the trials, it's hoped a cervical cancer vaccine might be available within 4 or 5 years. It could be given to young girls before they become sexually active, or it might be used on women who have a positive smear test to kill the virus before it causes further damage.
One of football's most famous names was sent off in today's league programme. With the details and the rest of the sport, here's Rob Bonnet.
The Tottenham and England World Cup star Paul Gascoigne was sent off during his side's defeat today by Manchester United. It happened after he'd complained about a decision by the referee Vic Callow, who said that the player used abusive language. Gascoigne said that if he did swear, his remarks were not directed at the referee. Terry Venables, the Spurs manager, described the dismissal as harsh and said he'd considered the possibility that Gascoigne's high profile may have been a factor. Brian McClare settled the match with a goal in the last minute. Earlier, Ronnie Rosenthal scored 1 goal and made another in Liverpool's emphatic victory over Leeds. Alan Smith's 11th goal in 10 games gave Arsenal victory at Manchester City. And David Platt scored both of Aston Villa's goals to beat Crystal Palace. Those results leave the top 4 unchanged, but with Liverpool and Arsenal pulling away from the rest. Manchester United swap places with Tottenham. England's cricketers have suffered another humiliating defeat by Australia in the latest game of the World Series Cup in Sydney. Replying to Australia's 221 for 7, they were bowled out for 153, losing their last 8 wickets for 50 runs.
Almost inevitably, England's latest disaster opened on a note of high promise. David Boone trapped by Fraser for 4 as Australia fumbled their way to 93 for 5. But the fumbling was about to afflict English hands as Tufnell made an embarrassing hash of a run-out. Then O'Donnell and Mark Waugh, neither of whom can make the Test team, turned the match with a record stand of 112 for the 6th wicket. Though Gooch and Larkins initially fashioned a spirited response, England's speciality, spectacular collapse, was waiting in ambush. 65 runs were on the board when the captain departed for 37. What followed would have been scarcely credible had it not all happened before. Carelessness accounted for Smith for 1. Then Stewart's foolhardiness summed up England's approach as he became the first of 3 victims for Alan Border's innocuous left-arm spin. When Fraser holed out to Boone, England had lost all 10 wickets for 88, the last 8 for 50. To reach the final, they must beat Australia in their last match and score more than 220 in the process.
Seagram won the big race of the day, the ASW Handicap Chase at Cheltenham. The field contained several possible Grand National runners. Peter Bromley describes the closing stages.
And it's Seagram on the far side of Bonanza Boy. They're in the air together. Hugh Davis gets to work on Bonanza Boy. Hugh Davis on the stand side. Seagram's hanging right across the course. Seagram's coming right across and pushing her. Hugh Davis across to the stand side, but Seagram now has the lead by about 2.5 lengths on the line. Seagram wins it.
And Bonanza Boy came in 2nd, and the Langham Dyer took 3rd place.
And that's the news on New Year's Day. Breakfast News is back tomorrow morning on BBC One at 6:30.
Hello. The high ground in Devon had a gust to 96 miles an hour this evening. We're still getting gusts to 70 miles an hour in exposed parts of the south and west as these weather fronts rush rather quickly eastwards across the country. These fronts clearing away during tomorrow, except from the extreme south there. A less windy day, but still pretty windy, and plenty of showers in the north and west particularly. At the moment it's heavy driving rain in many places, but drier weather will spread from the northwest during the course of the night to most places, and the snow will continue to thaw over the high ground in the north. With all that wind, a fairly mild night, no frost anywhere, and the thaw continuing in northern districts. Tomorrow, a brighter day for most of us. A lot of cloud over these southern counties of England at times, and in the Channel Islands with some rain in places, but for most of us, a bright and rather windy day. Plenty of showers in the north and west, and those showers gradually turning more wintry on the high ground over Scotland. And gales, yes, gales, again in exposed western districts. Those are the average wind speeds at midday tomorrow. But temperatures for most of us not too bad in spite of that strong wind. About 8 Celsius, 46 Fahrenheit. A slightly colder day, we think, on Thursday with sunshine, and in the north and west, wintry showers in many places.